Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well as folks continue to drift in the door. We do have one bill before we're going to take up the budget, and Chair Lady Houston has House Bill 773. You should have a copy of that on your desks in front of you. And so, knowing that we need to be out of here by 9 o'clock, if at all possible, so the Rules Committee can meet, I don't want to suffer the wrath of Chairman Meadows, and knowing that I'm trying to get a little bill on the floor tomorrow, I don't want to upset him. So at this point, I will turn the podium over to Chair Lady Houston to explain her bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before you today House Bill 773, and House Bill 773 is in regard with the Georgia Loan Program and Georgia Dream Loan Program. And before I begin talking about it, you probably wonder why this is not in Ways and Means, because we're seeking to raise the bond limit. But the reason it's not in Ways and Means, this has no financial impact on the fiscal sounding of the state. And these loans are guaranteed and insured by the federal government. The Georgia Housing and Finance Authority has provided over 44,000 families with loans since 1976. And Georgia Dream buyers are professional people in the fields of education, nurses, and public safety. And this is not, I know you think it's a rural program because I'm up here talking, but it's not just a rural program. These loans are given all over the state in rural and urban areas. And the income has to be at least $48,000. And Georgia Housing Financial Authority sells the bonds to raise capital. And these bonds are, under the Georgia Dream Program, are made through these loans are made through a network of private lenders throughout the state. The private lenders originate the loans and close the mortgage loans in accordance to Georgia Dream guidelines. The Georgia Housing Financial Authority bonds are rated AAA by Standard & Poor's. The Georgia Code limits the amount of bonds that the Georgia Financial Authority may have outstanding. The last time these bonds were raised, the amount of the bonds were raised, it was raised to $1.3 billion, and that was in 1993. And in 1993, according to the 1990 census, there were 6.7 estimated million people living in Georgia. Today, there's an estimated 12.5 million people in Georgia. So you can really see the need for us to raise this bond limit in order to provide housing. And you might wonder, who has to approve these bond limits, that you can raise it? It has to be approved by the Board of Directors of the Georgia Financial Authority, and also by the Georgia State Finance and Investment Commission. And the people that are on the Investment Commission, this was interesting to me, the people on the Commission for Investment of the state are the governor, the lieutenant governor, the state auditor, the Speaker of the House, the Attorney General, the Commissioner of Agriculture, and the Director of Treasury. We would like to raise this from $1.3 billion to $3 billion. Do I have any questions? No, it's three. We put in a committee substitute.
But
if y'all want to pass $5 billion, we'll take it.
There is a
we'll
committee
be glad
sub.
to. I'm sorry I didn't look at this bill she handed out, and we'd submitted a committee substitute that passed out of our committee. But we'll be glad to take $5 billion since the bill says this.
That's all. You got a question? I have a question from Chairman Martin.
My question was going to be that population figures you gave me about a doubling. I was going to question going to 1.35, so if the latest back to $3 billion
Yeah, it was 3 billion. But we'll take 5 if you want to give us that.
It's, I mean, in all joking aside, it seems like the right amount would probably be 3, which would be the perfect time to share. I'd be happy to pass out another bill.
We can do one of two things. Actually, what passed out was the committee sub out of subcommittee, so that's what we should be considering. And if y'all can bear with us, the only change in the bill from this to the committee sub was the 5 billion down to 3 billion. And so at the proper time, we'll be entertaining a motion to adopt the committee substitute to 773. I'm sorry we don't have that one in front of you. Chair Lady Smith.
I make a motion that we adopt the substitute to House Bill 773.
Have a motion and numerous seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, proceed to vote. All those in favor of adopting House Bill 773 by the committee substitute, do so by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, lady. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn the gavel over to our vice chairman of the committee, and we'll walk through the budget.
Earl, I wouldn't even sit by you. I asked him if I had to let people vote this time. That'd be great. That'd be great.
Good morning. Well, hold on a second. Let flight control get ready over there.
Proceed, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, everybody, good to be with you this morning. And again, thank you to all the subcommittee chairs and members of the committee as a whole, because all of you are on a subcommittee somewhere, for the work that y'all have done, not only on this budget, but also the 16 amended. I appreciate the hours that y'all have put in, especially those of you on Chairman Welch's subcommittee. I know that many of his committee meetings were longer than 3 hours. So but as y'all know, he's done an excellent job in trying to learn as being our newest vice chair, our subcommittee chair, and there's a learning process for him and hopefully for all of y'all as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't also thank Martha and Christine and our whole budget office staff. They're gathered around front and walking around the side handing out copies of the budget. I want to thank them for the long hours, the hard hours, going without meals. And I think Christine, Martha, and I had cashews for supper Friday night, thanks to Mike Chokus. Where's Mike at? In my office, because we were working kind of straight through supper there, trying to get done so we could all get home on Friday night instead of having to come back in on Saturday. So if you will, open your budget document. We're going to start walking through, and starting in Section 2, the Georgia House of Representatives. Now, there are a lot of statewide spreads, so you're going to see numerous changes throughout the numerous things that show up as changes throughout the document. And I want to kind of preface that on the front end so we don't have to touch each one of those as we go through the bill. You will see, of course, the 3% merit retention and recruitment raises that the governor had initially put into the budget. And of course, in the House, Senate, joint offices of the General Assembly, and in the legislative branch, we are the ones that actually go in and make those changes. And also in the Department of Audits, we're the ones that go in and make those changes. So you'll see those showing up as changes in those agencies. So I just want to let you know about that. Also, you will see at line 2.1.2, I know that y'all and I have received probably hundreds and even into the thousands of emails from some of our state retirees talking about the COLA that they've not been receiving for the last 8 or 10 years. And so what we're doing there Their fund is not to the point that they can issue a COLA internally. And so what we've done is gone in and spread throughout the agencies where there are ERS retirees a 3% one-time 13th check for this coming fiscal year to those retirees is kind of a thank you or a bonus check, however you want to look at it. But the way their system is set up, they've not been able to provide those COLAs like we've seen in some of the other systems that have continued to be able to pay out those COLAs over the last several years. So we're just going in and saying basically that we're doing a 3% one-time cost of living bonus is probably a better way to put it throughout those agencies where there are ERS retirees. And actually, the state dollars cost in that transaction is just a little over $2 million, but the total is a little over $3 million because there are some federal matches that come with doing it that way. So as we move on along, you'll see Section 3, many of those statewide spreads there. When you get to audits and accounts, a couple of changes there. You'll see the statewide spreads I mentioned earlier, but also the Department of Audits has for years been doing the audits for DCH of nursing homes, and by doing that, it's drained some of their staff resources to be able to do the local education agencies audits that they're required by statute to do. The ones they're doing for DCH, they were doing on a contract basis. And so working with the state auditor and DCH and OPB, what we're saying is no longer do those DCH audits, allow DCH to contract for those audits, take those personnel, take the $735,000 ask, do away with it, then take the personnel that were doing the DCH audits, and then perform those LEA audits. And so that's what we're doing there. Moving on to the Court of Appeals, 5.1.1, you'll see the 3% raise package there. Then dropping on down to 5.1.7, a position that was asked for that was actually completed in the amended budget, so it's not necessary at this point. 5.1.9, in the amended, they had asked for 2 positions. We'd agreed in the amended on 1 central staff attorney position, so we've gone back to what we did in the amended. 5.1.11, just the committee saying not at this time, we'll revisit it later. 5.1.14, again, not at this particular time. Chairman Welch wants his committee to work over the summer, though, looking at state agency lawyers across the board and making sure that we have everybody kind of on the same playing field, because we're seeing quite a bit of discrepancy and disparity between those salaries from the Department of Law to the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, and then within agencies, and we just need to kind of get a handle on that. 5.1.15, you'll see a position there, and that one is actually shared with the Supreme Court. And you'll see the also on 5.1.18, again, another shared position that is shared with the Supreme Court as well. Judicial Council, again, 3% raises at 6.3.1. And then on 6.3.4, position that was not deemed necessary at this particular time. And then also at 6.4.8, the committee felt there that it might be opening the door for something at this point without a laid out plan that could be very costly in the future. So we're just asking them if that's something they feel strongly about, to go back and bring us a plan that fully explains the long range and long-term plan there. 6.4.11, that asks there for the accountability court coordinator positions. We've actually moved that over to DHS because that's where a group of those are already headquartered or located. So you'll see that in DHS budget here in a little bit. 6.4.14, a reduction of one-time funds for the e-portal filing system. We left about 20% of the one-time funds there for ongoing maintenance costs that are associated with that program. 7.2.1, there's a bill that accompanies that, and it is not moving this session, so that reduction was made there as well. 8.2.4, just matching up to what we did in the amended budget there, or the 16 budget. Then if you'll look at 8.2.8, dealing with the assistant district attorneys, you'll see also an additional 3% there and over in the prosecuting attorneys council. These are the folks that are in the courtroom at the same time facing each other, so we felt like that it was the equitable thing to do to make sure that both sides were taken care of there. 8.2.9, that language references House Bill 279, saying that those assistant district attorneys were required by that bill. That is actually not the case, so that was taken out by the subcommittee. Under Superior Courts, 9.1.3, another position not deemed necessary at this time. 9.2.3, an increase that was not deemed necessary right now as well. If you look at 9.3.8, again, there were 9 courts mentioned there. However, only 6 of the 9 are certified programs, and what we're doing there is basically a policy statement. We did something very similar to this in the amended budget. That case, it was 6 versus 7. We're just asking that those courts be certified before they're funded, which is actually what was laid out in the law to be done. 9.3.10, again, not at this particular time. Supreme Court, 10.1.1, you'll see the merit raises there. A small change at 10.1.7, a small reduction on the per diem. 1.8 and 1.9 are positions not deemed necessary at this particular time, as well as 1.11. So those reductions were taken. Moving on to your next changes that are not statewide changes, if you will move to Section 12, DOAS. The 12.5.1, that was a statewide spread. All the agencies have a contract with DOAS for certain services, and so what the agency does, we appropriate to the specific agency. The agency then turns around and pays DOAS for those services rendered. The expansion of the services that they were looking for under 12.5.1 are things that we didn't think is something that necessarily need to be done at this point in time, and that's actually the dollars that we use to do the 3% COLAs across the board throughout state agencies as well. Department of Agriculture, Section 13. 13.1.2, an add of $200,000 for the veterinary diagnostic labs. As we've replaced equipment in those facilities and as the workload is increased, there's an increased need for those biomedical supplies for the testing they do there. Again, that's our front line of defense for avian influenza, and it's not a matter of if it hits, it's when it hits here in Georgia. Knock on wood, and thank the Lord, so far this year we've not had the outbreak that we were expecting, but we've still got about 3.5 months to go before we're kind of to the point we can breathe a little bit easy about that. Under Soil and Water Conservation Commission at 13.7.7, as Chairlady Houston and her committee were working through the budget, realized that through the operational efficiencies gained last year by the combination or the rolling under or administratively attaching soil and water to the Department of Ag, there were some administrative functions that could be combined there. And so capturing $150,000 of that savings. Also eliminating 10 vacant positions. We try to go through from time to time and look at vacant positions within agencies and go on and take those off the books. And also one other transaction you'll see in that ties in here, ties in again in DCA, and ties in again in forestry, is that there's for years been a grant or a contract with One Georgia for ag water metering reading across the state. It has gone through soil and water, and then from soil and water a contract with forestry. So we're just trying to simplify that step and do the contract from One Georgia directly to forestry, and you'll see that in a few minutes as well. Banking and finance, no changes. Behavioral health, you'll see several changes here. Chair Lady Dempsey and her committee, I like to say a lot of times they're kind of the heart of our committee. They're the soul of our committee, the part of our committee that tries to help folks, and not that the rest of the budget or the rest of the committee doesn't. But this is the portion of our budget here in human services that actually touch a lot of people across the state that are in need. So if you look at 15.1.4, starting a pilot program with Highland Rivers up in Region 1, serving Northwest Georgia, and it's a 2-week intensive intervention therapy for families where a family member has a mental health challenge. So we're looking at that. It has the potential to go statewide if this works as though, or the way that they think it will. You'll look also, something we didn't change but agreeing with the governor is at 15.2.4, 15.2.7, dealing with some ads there on the NOW and comp waiver programs. And we're glad that we can hopefully reduce that waiting list significantly over the next several years. Moving on through behavioral health, basically statewide changes throughout that. And then to DCA, small ad at 16.2.4, dealing with environmental fund projects or environmental projects. It's just a slight increase in the contract for a program that's been going on for about 75 years, so it's a $50,000 ad there. Moving to 1611.4, Governor requested an ad there of $10 million to REBA. However, looking at their reserves and looking at the list of prospective needs there, we felt like that at this point in time, we could use that $10 million throughout the budget for a lot of things that the House has as priorities. 16.12.2, as we continue through the water litigation and, of course, trying to be better stewards of our water resources throughout the state, the Georgia Rural Water Association has been a big partner in that, and so we're just increasing the base there by $25,000 with a contract with them. 16.12.3, the RC&Ds, the Resource Conservation and Development Districts across the state, are partners in every county in every state, and every county in the state. And last year we increased their funds by about $5,000 per district. We're recommending that again this year. They're able to leverage that with about a 4-to-1 match statewide. So that goes into a lot of education programs into schools, teaching young people how to conserve our natural resources. 16.14.2, the ag meter reading program that I mentioned a while ago, just making note there that contract can actually be reduced to $450,000. It's been at $1 million. And move that contract to forestry. Under Department of Community Health, this is the pulse of the committee. Chairman Parrish and his folks done some incredible work. Again, another one of those areas that touches just about every Georgian that we know. 17.1.9, dealing with a contract, reducing the fees associated with that contract, and that again goes back to the DCH and Department of Audit's auditing contract. Nursing home audits, again at 17.1.10, deals with those audit that we're talking about. Then looking at 17.1.1, that is a transfer from one program to another. You'll see a corresponding reduction at 17.7.4, and it's just moving those funds to there. The other are basically language items, and one of those dealing with our long-term acute care hospitals as well, that you'll see here in just a few minutes. Moving on over to 17.4. 17.4.4, you'll see the elimination of one-time startup funds for an FQHC that was in Wheeler County. It has stood up and operating. Last year was added 17.4.5, $500,000 for charity care clinics. That pilot program is up and running, so it's no longer necessary there. 17.4.6, continuing to look across the state and realizing areas that that do have healthcare deserts, realizing that Jackson and Jenkins County both do not have an FQHC. And so we do these one-time startup funds, then the federal government picks up the operational cost after that. 17.4.7, dealing with Katie Beckett waivers. Champions for Children has been an incredible partner with us and is administered through Easter Seals. And these are $2,000 grants that go to those families that are dealing with these young people that have debilitating life issues. And so just trying to help there. 17.4.8, last year, as you know, we kicked off the Rural Hospital Stabilization Program. Just recognizing there those funds are still there for those 4 pilot projects across the state, and that we aim to continue to do that pilot project. As y'all know, I was appointed by the governor to that commission back 2 years ago, and we've done an awful lot of work, and it's actually starting to pay dividends. We're seeing what we laid out as a plan start to work in those 4 communities. And as that matures, that'll be a program that hopefully we can roll out statewide that will stabilize the rural health care network. 17.7.3, just an adjustment or truing up of numbers there. 17.7.8, the change of nursing home owners money that we put in last year, the CHOW money, that need came in at a lower cost than what we thought it would, so we're doing a $4.1 million reduction there. 17.7.9, still staying with the 2012 cost report for nursing homes, but understanding that their costs have increased over the last couple of years, and so we're doing a 3% inflation adjustment there. We will go back next year again and revisit the cost report and see what we need to do at that point. Increasing some slot money for the ICWP program, or excuse me, not slot money, the personal care providers in the ICWP program. Y'all have met and seen these individuals around the Capitol that are highly functioning individuals, but they just need a little bit of help to get around. And so those individuals right now, what we're doing is paying those folks that accompany them between $8 and $9 an hour. And so they're not able to find folks that can accompany them and help them. And so what we're doing there is recommending that there are 2 levels in there. Level 1 provider is moving to $17.96 an hour, and level 2 moving to $20.20 per hour. It's kind of an odd number, but there is a federal match there, so that's the reason that it winds up with that 96 cents and 20 cents. Again, at 17.7.11, the adult day health centers, our area councils on aging have not seen an increase since 1998 in their provider fees that they get, so we're recommending a 5% raise there. Moving on to 17.7.2, another rate bump. Currently, they're being reimbursed at 70% of the 2014 report, and so we're just saying go to an 80% reimbursement rate there. 17.7.13 is dealing with the LTACs that I mentioned a while ago. Just seeing there, we've got quite a few LTACs, long-term acute care hospitals across the state. Medicaid actually capped that program several years ago. And I think, Chairman Parrish, if I'm correct, there are 5 hospitals in the state that are qualified, and there are about 12 or 15 others that did not make it in time for the cap. And what we're asking DCH to do is look at what we're doing with those 5 and see if there's a more efficient way to do it so we can kind of open the door for some of these others across the state. And actually, one of the ones that did not make it under the cap is the state's own LTAC hospital being operated by MCG down at Warm Springs. So looking to try to improve that program. 17.7.14 is the move that I mentioned a while ago, back up to 17.1.11. 17.8.6, many of you have heard from our primary care docs and OBGYNs across the state about their rates. And of course, we have an alarming rate of those doctors that are stopping seeing Medicaid patients, that are just deciding to quit practicing because it's not something they can continue to do and pay their own debts and operating costs. So what we're doing there is updating to 100% of the 2014 Medicare level. It will make a huge difference, especially in rural areas across this state, to make sure we have continued access to health care there. 1787, dealing with the advanced life support transport codes, a bump in the rate there. Currently, I think the average reimbursement is about $303, $302. This takes it a little over $400. Actually gets a little closer to covering that cost as well. 1788, we're just telling the CMOs right there that the increase that we're providing in 1786 is meant to go directly to the doctors and not to be something that goes to the CMO. So 100% of what we're doing at 1786 is to go to the providers. And then at 1789, just asking for an evaluation of any cost-saving measures dealing with ADHD and feeling that there's some efficiencies that can be made there as well. 1710.7, dealing with SHBP. When you look at it, and if you look at 1710.6, again, we get back to that discussion about health care, SHBP for our non-certificated employees at local school systems. And knowing that those are employees of the local school system and not employees of the state, it is actually the only category of employees that are not our employees that we've been covering with SHBP. However, realizing they're an incredibly important and crucial component to getting kids to school, making sure kids are fed at school, getting taken care of at school, and being helped to learn at school, is the reason we've let them remain in SHBP. However, we have been shifting that cost from the state more over to the local systems, and that's 10.6 is where $100 more is moving over to the local education agencies. However, in 1710.7, it's taken us about 2 years to put together a pilot program that would allow RESAs, the Region Educational Service Agencies across the state, to create their own health care plan for those non-certificated employees. And we think that doing so is going to provide better health care to those individuals, better access to health care to those individuals, lower copays, lower medical or medicine copays. And so what we're doing there is authorizing that pilot program, but also holding SHBP harmless during a 24-month period. So if the pilot program doesn't do what we think it's going to do, and those individuals and retirees that retire from the start of that program until either it takes off as being a program across the state, or if it for some reason fails, then SHBP will still be prepared to take those retirees back into the system. 1710.8, just recognizing there that we've made some significant deposits into the OPEB liability that we have. Just one of those things we're kind of noting for the bond rating agencies to understand that we are looking at that obligation and realize that we have it. 1711.3 is a transfer from 1712.2. 1711.4 is one of our is creating a new position, but one that is to work with smaller hospitals across the state in establishing residency programs within them. 17.212, again, that's the one that moved up to 1711.3. 1712.3 transfers to 1715.4, and I'll talk about it in just a second. 1712.4 is establishing an emergency residency program at Memorial Hospital in Savannah. That's actually the second busiest emergency room in the state, so we feel like that is a good partnership to take advantage of. The first busiest, of course, is Grady here in Atlanta, second Memorial there in Savannah. 1715.3 is establishing a loan repayment program for PAs and APRNs, and it'll be about a $10,000 award per student, and it'll be renewable for up to 4 years to help them in the cost associated with going and getting their schooling there. 1715.4 is the transfer from 1723, dealing with the South Georgia Family Medicine Rural Residency Training Program. That will actually allow them to draw down an additional $200,000 from the upper payment limit. I think it's at Colquitt Regional, and Moultrie is where that's going to be. 1718.3, the request there was for $43,000 for rent increase. However, the committee felt at this time 21.5 would be appropriate, and if our colleagues in the Senate wish to add to it, that'll be all right as well. The Department of Community Supervision, as you all know, that last year we rolled up a lot of the pardons and paroles functions on dealing with probationers out in the state between DJJ, DOC, and pardons and paroles. And so within that, that has created several operating efficiencies, and what you'll see there on 18.111 is capturing some of that savings, and also at 18.213 capturing some of that savings. At 18.214 and 215, those were one-time funds for some technology and a risk assessment tool. Those funds have been expended and are no longer necessary. Moving on over to corrections. As we've gone through over the last 4 or 5 years, the Governor's Criminal Justice Reform Program, it has been one that is being modeled across the country now, is one that is being held as an extreme success. And you know, a lot of times we make these changes and it's a long time before we actually see something happen as a result of these changes. The one that's most prevalent to me is at 19.1.1, and that's the county jail subsidy. Not 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we all had our local sheriffs complaining about how many state prisoners were located in county facilities and how long they were staying. At that point in time, we were spending about $21 million a year for the county jail subsidy. As you know, we're making a reduction, taking that fund down to $5,000 for the coming year. As of, I think it was December 31st, the spend out of that account to that point was $660. So that is a resounding success, and I point directly back to criminal justice reform and that we're being smarter about locking up the ones we're afraid of, but not the ones we're necessarily mad at. Moving on over, Section 21, Driver Services, 2126, just a reduction of one-time funds for commercial driver's license pad. That project has been completed. Looking at Section 22, decal. Great program. We all know what it does. It's the pre-K program across the state. Coming out of the Education Reform Commission this past summer, there were some recommendations, and some of those are being recognized here in the budget at 2234 and 2235. Some increases for classroom assistants plus kind of a teacher pay scale for those pre-K teachers. 2236, just asking them to utilize about $1.15 million to provide $300 one-time bonuses, or not bonuses, materials monies to the classrooms. That'll be about 3,800 classrooms across the state, serving 84,000 kids statewide. Something that we've done in the past and just not been able to do for the last several years. A lot of their materials that they use are in dire need of updating. Books, believe it or not, when 4-year-olds are handling books and dribbling on them and spilling stuff on them, they do wear out. Kind of like documents on the floor here. Moving on to Section 23, 2398. One of the things that during the recession we had to reduce significantly was our investment into tourism marketing dollars, marketing our state to other states across the country. And so what we're doing is Chairman Houston, Chair Lady Houston, and her committee felt a need to invest some of those dollars back into tourism. And so that's what we're doing at 9.8. At 9.9, Georgia Historical Society, in a partnership with the state, maintain our historical markers across the state. And so those funds there help them with maintenance of those markers and actually establishing some markers that need to be put up around the state. Moving on to Section 24, Department of Education, 24.1.5. In the 3% salary adjustments, as they were spread in the governor's budget, there were a few pieces that did unfortunately get missed. So what we've done is gone back and picked up those pieces here. These that increase there deals with the area adult teachers that work with every classroom, ag education classroom in the state, and also takes care of the piece of the extended day, extended year programs that are out there in the state as well. You'll see a corresponding addition over in career technical education as well, because you have those instructors, you have those leaders of the CTSOs that were skipped as well. 24.1.6. We had a couple of asks for a couple of new young farmer programs in the state, so you're looking at Atkinson and Toombs County there. 24.6.1, communities and schools. Been a great partnership in dealing with kind of non-traditional students and making sure that they complete high school. If you don't have a communities and schools affiliate in your district, I highly recommend it. We have a very successful one in Barrow County, and it has changed the lives or corrected the path of many lives of students throughout my district. So you got a $150,000 ad there. They serve about 120,000 students a year as well. 24.10.2, just a reduction in funds there. The Georgia Virtual School actually uses tuition. They're on a path to become self-sustaining, so we're starting to capture some of those savings there. 24.11.5. Helping DOE with their IT needs, knowing that they were going to come up a little bit short on their current budget for some of the improvements they're doing, trying to help them as well. 24.12.2, actually in the data that had been presented to OPB, there was a mistake. About two of the facilities had reported some incorrect data, and since OPB had put together their budget, we got the proper numbers, and so that's a correction there. 24.13.5, nutrition. As we've gone across looking at state employees and doing a 3% raise for those individuals, we also realize there are three other categories of individuals that typically get those raises, and so that's what we're doing with school nutrition workers, school nurses, and school bus drivers. So you'll see that. I'll mention those other two here in just a second. Under QBE 24.17.1 and 2, again, dealing with the Quality Basic Education funding formula, the 17.1 is dealing with enrollment growth and the change in training and experience of the teachers. There are about 13,000 additional students since this time last year, meaning that there are about 2,100 additional teachers across the state. 17.2 is reducing what had been the austerity reduction by $300 million. We're now down to a 2% reduction, or about $166 million. 24.17.6, realizing and understanding that the SB 10 waivers, that's what we've traditionally called them, typically we make a large ad in the big budget, and then in the amended budget we go back and capture about what we put in the big budget as savings, because there is a rather large number of attrition of individuals leaving the program. And so what we're doing there is just saying use those attrition numbers, which is about 19%. Use those attrition numbers and go ahead and let's capture that savings on the front end. 17.10 and 17.11 deal with school nurses and the bus drivers. 17.12 is just language, putting it there so that the LEAs realize there is a change in the SHBP. 24.18.2, traveling around the state, Chairman Coleman and I and many of you have heard from teachers talking about PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention Support System, and how much it has impacted the students they serve. Chairman Coleman and I visited with two groups of teachers right before Christmas, and both of those groups, they were bragging about how well PBIS has worked for them, and just wanting to expand that program for more usefulness across the state as well. 24.23.7, I mentioned the extended day, extended year, and area adult teachers and CTSO folks. That's just taking care of the 3% raise for them at that item. Under ERS 25.3.2, we're just asking the PSERS, the Public School Employee Retirement System, to look at their funding level and consider a COLA for their employees or their retirees as well, and that's all we're asking them to do there. And then 25.4.3, That's where we're actually able to match some additional funds on the 3% one-time COLA that we're doing for the state retirees. Section 26 Forestry Commission, 26.1.7, just recognizing where we're asking One Georgia to now contract directly with the Forestry Commission to do the ag meter reading program. Office of the Governor, moving on to section 27, you see the statewide spreads throughout it. And then at 27.10.5, under the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, just asking or directing them to utilize $500,000 of their existing funds to do grants to local school systems to help with those systems that have low or no participation in advanced placement STEAM programs. That's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And so just trying to encourage the use of those programs across the state as well. 28.5.4. I mentioned a while ago in DHS about those the Parent Accountability Coordinator positions. That's just moving it from CJCC to where there's actually a program existing today. Looking at DHS on section 28, agreeing there with the governor's ask to add an additional 175 child protective workers, case workers across the state, trying to move that ratio down lower and trying to actually get that ratio to about one caseworker to 18 kids. So that's what we're doing there. 28.6.7 through the work of the minority leader, Stacey Abrams, and a committee across the summer looking at the need for kinship navigators for these kids in DFACS and in foster care, just recognizing that and agreeing with the governor with that add as well. 28.6.9, our CASA is doing an extremely good job working with these foster kids across the state, and they do yeoman's work in raising their own funds, but it's also a partnership, and in a partnership, the other partner has to help as well. So that's what we're doing, is increasing the funds that goes to the statewide CASAs by $500,000. Looking at 28.8.6, as you know, within DFACS there are numerous SAG, Special Attorneys General, Special Assistant Attorneys General, that are used by juvenile court judges across the state and DFACS to plead cases. They've not had a raise since 2002 in their hourly rate. We're doing a $5 per hour rate increase there. Understand that within that what will now be $57.50 if the Senate agrees, that out of that it's not all going to the attorney. That also goes to pay for their operating costs. They're basically a contract employee. Moving on to 28.10.7, Elder and Community Living Services. Reducing or helping increase, not reduce, but I guess you're reducing from the nursing home, putting them in a community setting. This opens up and allows for the transition of another 125 seniors from nursing home, which is a much higher cost place to house those individuals, to a lower cost community setting. 28.11.4, dealing with Meals on Wheels senior center nutrition programs. The providers there have not seen a rate increase since 1998. Those are the people actually putting the meals together. And so I've met with them throughout the summer and felt that that was something that was a legitimate ask as well. Looking at 28.15.3 and 28.15.4, and actually 28.15.2, understanding and realizing that the need for foster care is growing across the state, just making sure we're doing what we need to do as the guardian of those children. Then looking at 28.15.5, those providers have not seen an increase in a little over 10 years. The utilization has grown by about 18%, but yet they're still doing the same thing for the same money they were 10 years ago. So we realize that those are our youth homes, those are the foster care homes across the state that are taking care of the wards of the state. Family Connection at 28.21.1, that's a partnership throughout every county in the state. Before the recession, we were doing $50,000 grants to each of those. They took a pretty good hit. Last year, we added a little bit back. This year, we're adding a little more back to the work that they're doing, or to help with the work that they're doing across our state. 28-23-6, you'll see this in a couple of places. And it's just asking the VOC Rehab agency to work with TCSG. VOC Rehab has a unique opportunity to receive a 4-to-1 federal match for dollars that are sent up. And of course, TCSG is in the business of educating workforce across the state. Just because these individuals may have a handicap, it doesn't mean that they're not able to do something and that they want to do something. So we feel that that's a good partnership to take advantage of as well. No changes in insurance. Moving on to Section 30, just a couple of changes there. 30.3.6 on GBI. Making sure that I'm not getting into the Chairman of Rules time. 30.3.6, you'll see an add of 4 scientist positions. Kind of corresponding to that is a reduction at 30.4.6, where we put in 8 agents last year. And so the governor had already recommended adding 20 investigator positions, so the chairman and his committee decided that we'd take the reduction but also provide those scientists that the commissioner there is needing, or Director Keenan is needing for their agency. Moving on to juvenile justice, 31.1.9, that pairs up with the out-of-home care piece that we looked at line 28.15.5. There is a out-of-home care component there, so we're wanting to make sure that it's taken care of as well within DJJ. Department of Labor, no changes. Department of Law, no changes other than statewide changes. Section 34 DNR, 34.3.4, small reduction of 910,000. That's not really a small reduction, but relative to 24 billion, I guess it is. But that actually does leave 1.7 million in that fund for some water studies that they are doing that do have an impact with the water litigation. 34.7.4, Representative Tanner brought this to my attention that there are several abandoned vessels within Lake Lanier that are causing navigational hazards there. And just as we have done on the coast and in other parts across the state, it does become our obligation through DNR to raise those sunken vessels and mitigate that hazard that they're causing. Moving on through Section 35 and 36, no changes in them. Moving on to Section 37, the public defenders. A couple of asks that were requested there, and one savings that we were actually able to capture. 37.211 just provides for a trial team for the capital defender, and if you look at 2.12, we bonded some vehicles for them last year, and they'd come back and ask for some, or asked to keep that money. However, those vehicles are being bought through bonds, so it's not necessary to provide the cash there. 37.2.13, as I'd mentioned when we were talking about district attorneys a while ago, these are the two people that are, one's prosecuting and one's defending, and so we want to make sure that we provide the same comparable salary increases for the defenders as well. Moving on to public health. If you look at 38.1.4, the governor had recommended a cut to the core website, the GeorgiaCancerInfo.org website. We put some money in there last year to develop that website. It's up and running, but there are some continuing maintenance costs and operational costs with it, so we've said do not take the cut. 38.1.5 is replacing some federal funds that were lost for women's health programs, and 38.1.6, again, another women's health program that we're asking to establish. 38.3.7, as you may or may not be aware, throughout the state there are currently, I think, 4 different telehealth programs. Public health has a telemedicine program. MCG has a telehealth or telemedicine program, and there are 2 other entities across the state. However, none of the 4 have the ability to talk to one another. So if on my network I need to see a psychologist, but the psychologist is on another network, another telehealth network, there's no ability to link the 2 together. What these funds will do is enable public health through their portal, through the statewide portal, to link those networks together so we can all share those resources statewide, and so that's what we're appropriating for there. Under public health, 38.5.3 and 5.4 deal with the Georgia Poison Control Center. They've seen an increase in calls, but also a reduction in federal funds, so 5.3 is backfilling some of those federal funds. 5.4 deals with the stroke support program that is housed at Georgia Poison Control Center because it is a statewide network, and so they're needing some additional funds to help stand that program up as well. 38.7.5, the governor had recommended a reduction there on the Georgia Comprehensive Sickle Cell Center. As we know, we did that last year, and that program is, to my understanding, a great success. So we're wanting to prolong that and let that continue to go. And also helping to establish at 38.7.6 a sickle cell center at Augusta University. Chairman Parrish has also mentioned that there are several of those sickle cell programs across the state, and that this summer he wants to sit down with all of them and see if there's some coordinated and joint efforts that can be done there. Instead of setting up separate silos, if those services can be shared and deliver those services to more people more effectively across the state. 38.12.5, the governor had recommended doing the last 2 years of the phase-in of the grant and aid hold harmless formula for the public health centers. We actually said, no, let's continue and do the 6th year. We'll do the 7th year next year. We use those funds to do the 2 changes I mentioned just a minute ago on the women's health and on the telemedicine program as well. Moving on to public safety, 39.1.4, 1 reduction for one-time funds used for hangar construction in Perry. Under Firefighter Safety Training Council, 39.6.4, increasing the funds for 1 compliance and evaluation position that they need there as they do training, not only for our professional firefighters across the state, but also for our volunteers statewide. So we'll make sure that they have the resources they need to protect all of us and all of our homes. Section 40 Public Service Commission. Y'all, we're getting close. Just bear with me a little bit longer. Last year, we'd established some one-time funds for some IT upgrades there at PSC. Representatives Dudgeon and F. Stration both met with PSC looking at those issues, and they've recommended that we keep those one-time funds in, and so that's what we're recommending to do. Also, there's an ad from the governor at 40.3.5 that we agree to that's monitoring the costs as Georgia Power continues to build Plant Vogel. Section 41. Chairman Earhart has had a little fun this year with regents. Fun for some, not for others. But as you heard, I think the day before yesterday, regents did announce that they're putting a tuition cap in place for the coming year. I want to thank them for that. We, as y'all know, you and I are the ones that get the phone calls when they do go up in tuition. And so hopefully they're realizing that that's the case, and they are realizing that's the case by putting the cap in place. 41.1.3, during the recession, ag experiment stations and College of Ag in general had taken significant cuts during the recession, so we're still trying to rebuild basically the support system for the #1 industry across the state. And so at 41.1.3 and 41.3.3, you'll see the addition of 5 research specialists that they're needing to continue to rebuild that program. And also at 41.3.4, the addition of 12 new county agents across the state. Last year we put in enough money, I think, for 6 county agents. They were actually able, through the partnership that they have with the counties, to, I think, actually place 10 or 12 agents across the state. So We're hoping that 12 might multiply to about 20, so we'll see. Marine Resource Extension at 41.12.2. Some interesting research going on down on the coast down there with some federal funds, and those federal funds are disappearing this year. In the early 1800s, Georgia was the #1 producer of oysters in the world, and through a lot of different things happening, that industry basically disappeared, but they're making some headway in reestablishing that industry, and we want to make sure that they have what they need to continue that research. 41.13.2. Something I'm kind of excited about is a program with the Medical College of Georgia to bring OB/GYNs back in for recertification. We have a lot of gynecologists across the state that have dropped their OB certification, no longer deliver babies. But as we're seeing the need for that reestablish itself across rural Georgia, we realize that we have a shortage there. MCG came to us a couple of weeks ago with an idea to bring these practicing gynecologists back in on a tailored program for them individually for 1 month, 2 month, 3 month rotations to get them recertified to go back out and practice the OB portion of their degree. So we're excited about that and looking forward to what that's going to do statewide. 41.15.6, GYSTC, Georgia Youth Science Training Centers, they have been a huge help in helping science, technology, and math teachers across this state know how to better teach and use technology today to teach. And so we're just bolstering the grant that we give them by about $150,000. Libraries is the other thing I want to mention. I'm sorry I skipped over that. My bad. Our public libraries across the state. As you're aware, and you've heard from your libraries, understand that they've not had monies to replace materials for quite some time. So I've talked with them actually, I guess, over the last 2 years about this issue. And their actual ask was $1 per capita, which would have been a little over $10 million. And unfortunately, we're not able to do that. But what we have done is come in with a 35 cents per capita increase in materials funding, which will be $3.7 million. That will make a dramatic difference in helping them update the materials that they have there for citizens throughout our districts and throughout the state to be able to use. Many of you also heard from Georgia Military College. I want to tell you, those guys were really effective this year. Georgia Military College holds a kind of a special place in my heart for what they do for a lot of kids down there, and understanding that at times they're kind of orphaned in a way when we look at it from the state government level, because they're the only college in the state that is not a member of the Board of Regents. And so they're kind of out there on their own, and so the only way that they get increases or increased allocations is we do them. And so at 41.21.6, you'll see an increase of $2 million to help them with a couple of their programs. One of them especially is the tutoring program that they do that really helps a lot of those at-risk kids that otherwise would probably drop out of college if they did not have that available to them. 42.6.1 under Department of Revenue, just an adjustment on the retirement for local tax officials, just a little bit more of a reduction there for actual need. Section 43, the Secretary of State's office, looking at what their projected expenditures are for the coming year. We've made some adjustments at 43.1.1, 43.4.6, and also at 43.6.3. Those are those three reductions there. Student Finance Commission, a couple of small changes there. At 44.3.1, a small reduction in the Hero Scholarship. However, do note that is rolled over to 44.15.2, that is the Service Council loans for Georgia National Guard folks across the state to be able to use. Those are very similar programs. There's some excess capacity there at Heroes, so we're using that excess capacity over there for the National Guard scholarships. You'll see the governor's projected increases for the Hope Scholarship programs. We're agreeing to those. At 44.9.1, the low-interest loan repayment program has been a great success, and it's actually to the point that it can function on its own because those loans are being repaid. And so that $1 million reduction there is taking the remaining state funds that were put there as a seed pot to actually get that going. And so they're no longer needed. 44.15.1, those of us that were here and served with Dr. Gene Maddox. Dr. Maddox saw a need several years ago that large animal veterinarians across our state were dwindling fast. And so he had passed a bill that we voted on in the House to create 5 service counsel large animal veterinary slots in the state, and so we're funding that program now that we've finally gotten to the point that we can. Section 45, teacher retirement, no changes. TCSG in Section 46, you'll see the statewide changes throughout it that I mentioned earlier. And then 46.4.9, just asking them to do the cooperative agreement with Voc Rehab on those federal matching funds. Transportation, no changes from the governor's document, but as you go through it, you'll see and understand that the effect of House Bill 170 from last year is, as Commissioner of DOT has stated, a transformational change to how we're going to do transportation in the state. And you'll see the impact of House Bill 170 at 47.3.2, 47.8.1, 47.11.2, which is about a 93% increase in routine maintenance, which is something we had been falling woefully behind in. Veteran services, no real changes there. There is one slight change in the transfer from veterans benefits up to the Georgia War Veterans Nursing Home. There had been a transfer recommended of $750,000. We've reduced that transfer to $600,000, but also at 48.4.7, several of us have been talked to and asked to support creating a women's veteran services coordinator position there at the Department of Veterans. And so we're asking that they utilize the existing funds of $150,000 to create that position. Section 49, workman's comp, no changes there. And then Section 50 is where Santa Claus came. Some got oranges and some got lumps of coal. I'm sorry. As you know, this year the bond projects have been a little bit tough for us to figure out how to try to help as many folks as we could. Last year, as we passed the budget, we did some additional funding for bridge repair and for transit. And at that point in time, we'd kind of agreed between the governor, the House, and the Senate that we would continue to do some additional bond funding for bridges. So the governor contemplated that, knowing that we need to remain within our debt management plan for the state, that we could not go to the $1.05 billion level that we went to last year and stay within that debt management plan. The governor included $100 million for bridge repair in his bond package. So in order to get that, a lot of the projects that we would have normally seen done by the governor that would have been the large capital projects that we see in TCSG and Regents in particular were not able to be done. And so in the agreement that we have also to remain at $50 million in the House and $50 million in the Senate, we've tried to go in and fix a few of the things that we knew that were needed, and one of those being the capital equipment outlay in DOE for vocational equipment going into new schools. That typically has been about a $10 to $12 to $15 million item. We picked up about half of this year's request on our side, hoping that our colleagues in the Senate will do the same. Also, the bonds for school buses were reduced from $20 million, which had kind of been our normal, down to $10 million. We've also gone in and replaced part of that money, about $4.2 million for that. That comes out of the House 50. When you look further, you'll also see some improvements for technology within our chamber and actually within this room as well. One in particular, our voting machine system. That voting machine, I think, is somewhere along the lines 12 to 15 years old. It's no longer manufactured. Parts are no longer manufactured for it. If something happens to it, we're out of business, or either we raise our hands for every vote and somebody has to count. So knowing that we need some technology upgrades within the chamber, we've got about $4 million in the bonds for those upgrades, and the legislative management system that's used by leg counsel to draft bills that go to the clerk's office and to the Secretary of the Senate's office as well. So some of those things are things that we felt like we had to do, and so that decreased the pot on the things that we really wanted to do. And so as you look through it, you'll realize there are some things that I would have liked to have done that we were just not able to do, that you would have liked to have done that we were just not able to do. But ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got to say about that. Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to answer any questions. Also, just a note that the bill will be posted to the website as soon as the committee report is turned into the clerk, which will be here shortly.
Thank you, Chairman England, for the presentation. And we've got some questions lighting up right here.
Turn it off.
Okay. Committee, I'm sorry, the real chairman has spoken, but now we've got Chairwoman Carter. Is that you? Parsons? What we got here?
Chairman, I wanted to ask you about on page 43.
Give me, if you don't mind, do a section number. My document's just a little bit different than yours.
Yes, sir. Section 24, Department of Education. We have apparently we've added 3% pay raises for specific 3% pay raise for some support personnel, school bus drivers, lunchroom workers, nurses. But if I'm reading it correctly and understanding correctly, in 2417.2, we're just saying for teachers to increase within that amount of money to increase teacher salaries. So I'm wondering why we didn't just add those support personnel to that line, or specifically say there'd be a 3% pay raise for teachers.
Within that 300?
Yes, sir.
Well, again, it goes back to there's kind of two different transactions. The teachers, it's a state contract. The personnel that you mentioned are county employees. And in the past, what has happened is as we have increased teacher salaries, we've also increased those salaries as well. That was not anticipated in that $300 million add. So we realized that that's something that needed to be captured and that we need to do.
I mean, if you further you, the only thing I'm concerned, I have no problem with those support people, although they're not in a classroom. I have no problem with them getting a 3% pay raise, but I do have, and I know the intent is that these school districts will give the teachers a 3% pay raise, but we haven't specified that. So those support personnel who are not in a classroom will get it, but the teachers are not guaranteed it. So that's
again, that's one of those things that's kind of left, as always, to the local school system. They tell us they want local control, and that's what we're doing. There's still systems that have furlough days. There's still systems that are not going 180-day calendar. And so we realize that if we stay specifically, that's what's to be done for those school teachers, that they may do it, but there's still a system somewhere with a 165-day calendar because they're still having to do furlough days. So you've got to kind of give them that flexibility, that judgment call on the local level for that.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate that. And I'll shut up, except that I would say I still think that's an issue that we're guaranteeing support personnel who are not in the classroom, have nothing to do with the learning process. We're guaranteeing them a 3% pay raise, but the teachers who are the ones on the front line who do the teaching, where the learning takes place, are not guaranteed 3%.
Well, I would tell you a couple of things. I would respectfully disagree that they're not essential. I'd say that they're drastically essential, because if we don't have good quality bus drivers taking the kids to the school, the kids don't get to school. If we don't have the nutrition personnel there, the kids don't eat. If we don't have the school nurses there, then we have outbreaks and illnesses. But also remember, as we have restored the austerity reductions through the last several years, those benefits have gone to the teachers through whether it's reduction of furlough days or through some raises that have been given by some systems across the state. However, nothing has been done for those three categories of employees that I've mentioned. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, Chairman Harden. Got you. Who's behind you? I can't see.
Jones.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Representative Jones.
Well, section 18.5, which is 18.5.6, where we are increasing funds for 5 community coordinators.
Yes, ma'am.
Have we identified what communities or what area?
I do not know. We can get you that information, but I don't know off the top of my head. But we'll be glad to get that for you.
And one other question, 38.1, we're going to establish 2 women's programs.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what women's programs we will be establishing?
These will be within the Department of Public Health, and I'm not exactly familiar with exactly what they're going to be doing. The first program, 38.1.5, there is kind of a specified program that they're going to be doing there with some helping with pregnancy prevention. 38.1.6, I think and understand that it's more of a counseling component.
All right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, from the committee, do we have any other questions for the chairman?
Ladies and gentlemen, I certainly do appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we actually do need to take a vote on this one.
Chair. We have a motion to pass in a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
It was.